Okay, we're back with part two. There might even be a part three. Reason being, I know most of his stories, where the other guys, I heard here, there, and had my own. So, like I said, he had a plethora of stuff he knew that he wouldn't teach me completely because my brothers, I have two brothers that started trapping so hard and so heavy for food that they almost devoid the place of animals. But he did teach me how to set a simple snare. He did teach me how to set a fish snare, trot lines. Told me if I ever had a chance to get what they called at the time was a, what did he call that thing? A square fisherman's net. He said, grab a piece of that. He said, 'cause you can't beat the amount of fish that a square fisherman's net would catch. Obviously, we know it as a gill net, but. And of course, he showed me how to cook fish over a rock and over a spit and over a stick and, the typical things you teach your kids in the woods. One of the earliest stories I remember that was just between me and my dad is I was back in the back one time, just me and my buddy, and we decided we wanted to spend the night. So Dad came back to see what we were doing, and we told him. So we put up a lean-to and whatnot, and he said to me, now you're going to spend the night in that shelter since you put it up. I said, okay. So we were kind of skeptical because I live in the middle of bear swamp, and he came walking through the woods with my single barrel and a handful of shells. He said, here, you're going to need this for tonight. And me and Jim, we had a great time. We were, mountain men out and out at that point. So some of the stories that he told me is one time him and that shotgun guy that we first heard about, they went on a hunting fishing trip up in, I guess it would be the Delaware State Forest now. They were out for 2 weeks. And that was in late September, October. And if I remember the numbers correctly, the haul was 135 pounds of fish. Tom had taken everything back home. Dad stayed. Tom came back, picked up the second week. So, I think it was 135 pounds of various fish. 16 deer. I think he said 40-some or 50-some squirrels. Turkeys, rabbits, and over 20 apiece. And they brought this all home and divvied it up between the families. Now they spent 2 weeks out in the bush. And he took his survival kit, a heavy blanket, no sleeping bags, and just basically built a natural shelter that he was going to live in for 2 weeks. Covered it with pine boughs and pine straw and stayed there. And he said it was pretty wild. He had wildcats come in. At that time, a wildcat was a little bit smaller than a bobcat. It was basically a feral cat that mixed with a bobcat. And he had wildcats there that he had to fight off a few times. Your typical mountain lion that we still don't have around here. It was a crazy story. He ran out of shotgun shells the next day after Tom left, so instead of shooting stuff, he just trapped it and snared it. But he stayed in the middle of some pretty wild terrain without a gun. That's one thing I can tell you with all these old men that I've noticed. Like I said about walking out of the house when it was dark, he'd just walk out of the house. He wanted to go sit by the pond for a while, which was about 400 yards from the house. He'd just walk out of the house at, 12 o'clock at night, go sit by the pond. Took his pocket knife with him, that's all he needed. Every now and then you see a little fire going up there. He'd get a little fire going and, just sit there and contemplate the universe. He couldn't stay in the house very long. Now, as far as fishing, I mean, when I was a kid, we used to go for suckers up on the Lackawaxen and the Delaware. We used to go for sunfish, panfish, early, like late April, early May. When you get them big ones, it's in for breeding season. He was a bass fisherman, so he always made sure he got out there for bass. But oddly enough, he never caught a bass over 5 pounds. Actually, he never caught a bass over 3 pounds. And he didn't like pickerel. He didn't like fishing for them. But then in the fall, the cat run and stuff like that, we'd go. There'd be a bunch of us. There'd be my dad and my uncle and my cousins. There'd be 7 or 8 of us. We'd go sit up on these fishing trips all night long. Build a campfire and just fish. My 2 brothers. So it was a pretty interesting life. But it was food. That's what we lived on. So some of the more interesting stories was 1947, he'd gotten out of the Army. He served from 41 to 47 in World War II with the Army Air Corps. And 1947, he had gotten out of the Army. So he come home. It was deer season. So he said to my mother, I'm going to go deer hunting. He grabbed, I think he said 2 or 3 shells out of the box. And that single barrel I have. And he takes off hunting on Music Mountain. Up there in the column dumps, which if you live in coal country, you know what I mean. If you don't, the excess coal they take out of the mine, they would just dump them in big piles, and they call them column dumps. And there's little pathways between them, So he comes around the corner, and here's this big 10-pointer. I still have the rack. Come around the other side. Ba-boom! He hit him, but it was fine shot. It wasn't slugs or buckshot. So Dad always hunted with number 4 fine shot. So he hit the buck, shot him again. Finally, the 3rd time, he put the buck down. In the meantime, this gentleman named John Evanitsky lived on the other side of the mountain, came walking down and said, hey, what's going on? What's all the shooting about? Well, him and my dad got into kind of an argument. My dad got up to the deer, and there's the deer laying, and it wasn't dead. So John said, well, since the deer ain't dead, I'm shooting him. So my dad took out a knife. It was a Remington number 4 Hunter model. I still have the knife. Takes this knife at about 30 feet, whacks this deer in the neck with it, and kills the deer. Well, this Evanitsky guy was so enamored by the fact that he just watched a guy throw a knife and kill a deer with it. He helped him drag it out of there and clean it. And from that day on, for the next 4 or 5 years, John would show up every year at my dad's house with a box of buckshot for him. But, so he actually took a deer with a knife. Now, that was a story we heard all through our family for years, right? So one night we're in a bar room, me and Dad, and this guy walks up to me and says, ain't you Elmer Ritter? Yeah. I remember when you killed the deer with a knife. The bar went silent. What do you mean he killed a deer? And John verified the story. It was John Evanitsky. That what I just told you actually happened. He actually threw a knife and killed the deer with it. But yeah, that was one of the big stories. And the bear story was another one. They were out hunting, and watch this. This is, oh, no, okay. They were out hunting with my uncles and stuff one day, and they seen a bear. My uncle happened to put a round into it. Didn't kill it. So the story goes that my dad tracked this bear for 3 days. Tracked him over 2 mountain ranges here in Pennsylvania. I finally caught up to the bear, and it had died from its wounds. It wasn't hit very hard, but it eventually died. And he packed this bear back home and gave my uncle the bear and the meat, and he couldn't believe it. especially since he didn't have a gun with him. That's a hell of a story, you know. But fishing wise, I mean, my dad taught me how to do the brook trout thing, native trout thing. When if you're in a hole and you catch a native trout, don't yank him up out of the hole where he's wiggling and squiggling. Walk down the bank slowly with him on the line where he's not going to jump and squiggle. And then you'll be able to throw back in the hole without spooking him. Another thing he taught me is don't walk downstream and fish for trout. Walk upstream. This way here, the water pulls all the sediment and everything you're kicking up away from you so that in front of you is clear. Because if you walk the other way, all that cloudiness is going in the water. These fish know there's something upstream coming at them. Instead of getting 5 trout a day, I was getting 50 and 60. Trying to remember other stories. But yeah, hunting with my dad was a unique experience. He had 2 guns, sometimes 3. Dad hunted everything with a 12-gauge shotgun. And he had a 22 that he used for woodchucks and stuff like that. Sometimes. Most of the time he used mine. But until the day he died, he had a monster. He had that Bay State that I have. And he had a Schneider single barrel breech lock with a big, flintlock hammer on it. It was a conversion gun that my great-grandfather gave him. And he lost a hammer on that, so that stayed in the house forever. But he used to use that. I know my brother came back from Vietnam, he bought him a Mossberg 500 pump. And that's all Dad hunted with for 30 years. One day we were sitting in the house, my mother said to him, Elmer, take the shotgun out and get your deer instead of messing with that deer rifle. So he walked out the door with the pumpkin balls, what they called them. And he was back 4 hours later with a very nice deer. It was like the 3rd day from the last day of the hunting season. So from that day on, he sold the deer rifle, and that's all he hunted with was a 12-gauge. So that's all you ever need in Pennsylvania woods is a 12-gauge. It'll kill anything that moves. He's right. Sometimes it's a bit overkill. He would hunt with number 4, copper-plated. He said a number 4 is big enough to kill a rabbit or a squirrel with 1 pellet, but yet you won't make sieves out of them like you will with a number 6 or a 5. Fishing, he would use 12-pound test for everything, and he would use number size 4 hooks, because he said a number 4 hook, you have to get a good sized sunfish to take the hook, so you're not catching the little ones. And they'll hook anything from a big bass to a small bass, sunfish, perch, and everything else. And he never would use the long shank hook. It had to be a regular Mustad number 4. Oh, this is going a bit long too, so let's finish up on part 3 then.